June 4, 1942. The Pacific Ocean, northwest of Midway Atoll. Admiral Chester Nimitz made a decision that would destroy 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in a single day. The Japanese carrier fleet that attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier would cease to exist. Nimitz based this decision on intelligence that many in his command didn't believe. Codebreakers said the Japanese were coming to Midway. Senior officers called it speculation. Nimitz trusted the codebreakers anyway. This is the story of how one man's faith in a handful of cryptonosts changed the Pacific War. The war in the Pacific began with intelligence failure. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japanese carrier aircraft struck without warning. 2,400 Americans died. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. The Pacific Fleet crippled. But the Japanese made a mistake. They missed the American carriers. USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga were at sea. Those 3 carriers would have to hold the Pacific until America could rebuild. After Pearl Harbor, Navy kryptonists at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor worked around the clock. Their target, JN-25, the Japanese Navy's operational code. The Japanese used thousands of 5-digit numbers to represent words, phrases, and coordinates. Breaking it required analyzing message traffic, identifying patterns, and building a codebook 1 fragment at a time. Commander Joseph Rochefort lead Station Hypo. He was a career intelligence officer who had studied Japanese in Tokyo before the war. Now he worked in a basement combat intelligence unit in Pearl Harbor, often in a bathrobe because the room was so cold. His team included linguists, mathematicians, and radio operators. They worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. By May 1942, Rochefort's team could read about 15% of Japanese naval messages. Not much, but enough to detect patterns. Enough to know something big was coming. May 14, 1942. Station Hypo intercepted Japanese message traffic indicating a major operation. The target appeared in code as AF. Multiple carrier divisions, invasion forces, support vessels, the largest Japanese naval operation since Pearl Harbor. But where was AF? Rochefort believed AF meant Midway. The tiny atoll sat 1,100 miles northwest of Hawaii. It had an airfield, a garrison, and strategic importance. If Japan took Midway, they could threaten Hawaii itself. But Rochefort needed proof. He devised a test. He ordered Midway to send an uncoded radio message reporting that their freshwater distillation plant had broken down. 2 days later, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese message. AF was short on freshwater. F was Midway. Rochefort took his analysis to Admiral Nimitz. On May 25th, the Japanese would attack Midway in early June with 4 or 5 carriers. They would approach from the northwest. The attack would come at dawn. Invasion forces would follow. But Rochefort faced skeptics. Naval Intelligence in Washington disagreed. They believed the Japanese target was the Aleutian Islands or even the West Coast. Some officers thought Rochefort was reading too much into fragmentary intelligence. The Japanese might be feeding false information to American codebreakers. Admiral Nimitz had to decide. Trust Rochefort and position his carriers for an ambush, or hedge his bets and keep forces dispersed in case Washington was right. Nimitz made his choice. He trusted Rochefort. The decision committed. America's 3 available carriers to a single point in the Pacific, based on intelligence many considered unreliable. If Rochefort was wrong, the carriers would be out of position. If the Japanese attacked elsewhere, Hawaii would be vulnerable. If this was a Japanese deception, Nimitz was sailing into a trap. But if Rochefort was right, America could ambush the Japanese carrier fleet. Nimitz had 3 carriers. USS Enterprise and USS Hornet formed Task Force 16 under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. USS Yorktown, damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea 3 weeks earlier, would be Task Force 17 under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Fletcher would command the combined force. Yorktown had taken a bomb hit at Coral Sea. Navy engineers estimated 3 months for repairs. Nimitz gave them 3 days. 1,400 workers swarmed Yorktown at Pearl Harbor. They worked around the clock, welding steel plates, replacing damaged systems, restocking ammunition. 72 hours later, Yorktown sailed for Midway. She wasn't fully repaired, but she was operational. Nimitz positioned his carriers northeast of Midway. Station Hypo provided specific coordinates for the Japanese approach. The American carriers would wait there, hidden, until the Japanese committed to attacking Midway. Then the Americans would strike. The plan required perfect timing. If the Americans attacked too early, the Japanese could retreat or reposition. If they waited too long, the Japanese would destroy Midway and might detect the American carriers. The window was narrow. Nimitz gave his commanders one critical advantage. He told them everything Station Hypo knew. The Japanese order of battle, expected approach vectors, timing estimates, fleet composition. American commanders knew more about Japanese plans than some Japanese commanders knew. This was unprecedented. Intelligence was usually compartmented, revealed only on a need-to-know basis. Nimitz broke protocol because he trusted Rochefort's intelligence completely. Enterprise and Hornet sailed from Pearl Harbor on May 28th. Yorktown followed on May 30th. By June 2nd, all three carriers were on station, 200 miles northeast of Midway, waiting. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto commanded the Japanese operation. He was Japan's most experienced naval commander, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. His plan for Midway reflected his strategic vision: force a decisive battle that would destroy America's remaining carriers. The Japanese brought overwhelming force: 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These were the same carriers that struck Pearl Harbor. They carried 260 aircraft and battle-tested aircrew who had fought across the Pacific. Supporting them were 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 12 destroyers. Behind the carrier force came the invasion fleet. 12 transports carrying 5,000 troops, 8 heavy cruisers, 2 battleships, more destroyers, and far to the rear, Admiral Yamamoto himself, aboard the battleship Yamato, with the main battle fleet, 3 battleships, 1 light carrier, and supporting vessels. It was the largest concentration of Japanese naval power in the war. Against it, America had 3 carriers, 8 cruisers, and 15 destroyers. The Japanese outnumbered American carrier aircraft 260 to 233. They had more combat experience, better torpedoes, veteran pilots, but they didn't know the Americans were waiting. Japanese intelligence believed America had only 2 carriers in the Pacific. They thought Yorktown had been sunk at Coral Sea. They expected surprise. Admiral Keiichi Nagumo, commanding the carrier force, planned to strike Midway at dawn, suppress its defenses, then prepare for possible American carrier response later that day or the next. The Japanese had one critical assumption: American carriers were near Hawaii, not near Midway. This assumption was based on standard naval practice and radio traffic analysis. It was reasonable, it was logical, it was completely wrong. June 4, 1942, 4:30 in the morning. Japanese carriers launched their first strike against Midway. 108 aircraft, 36 fighters, 36 dive bombers, 36 level bombers. They flew southeast toward the atoll, 240 miles away. Admiral Nagumo kept half his aircraft on deck as reserve, armed with torpedoes in case American ships appeared. This was standard doctrine: attack the land target, but be ready for naval combat. At 5:53 a.m., a Navy PBY Catalina patrol plane spotted the Japanese carriers. The pilot radioed many planes heading Midway, bearing 320, distance 150. Minutes later, another PBY found the Japanese carriers themselves. 2 carriers and main body, bearing 320, distance 180. Admiral Fletcher, aboard Yorktown, received the reports. The Japanese were exactly where Station Hypo said they would be. He ordered Enterprise and Hornet to launch immediately. Yorktown would follow after recovering its search planes. But there was a problem. The Japanese carriers were at the edge of American aircraft range. If the Americans launched now, their aircraft might not have fuel to return. Standard doctrine said to close the distance first. Admiral Spruance made a decision. He launched immediately. At 7 o'clock, Enterprise began launching aircraft. Hornet followed. In 2 hours, they launched 116 aircraft, 20 fighters, 67 dive bombers, and 29 torpedo bombers. The strike flew west toward the Japanese position. Meanwhile, the Japanese struck Midway. At 6:20 a.m., Japanese bombers hit the airfield. Fuel tanks exploded. Buildings burned. Marine fighters rose to intercept, but they were outnumbered and outclassed. 15 of 26 Marine fighters were shot down. But Midway wasn't destroyed. The airfield was damaged, but operational. Anti-aircraft fire was still heavy. The Japanese strike commander radioed Nagumo. "There is need for a second attack." This message changed everything. Admiral Nagumo faced a choice. He had 93 aircraft on deck, armed with torpedoes for attacking ships. The strike commander said Midway needed another attack. That meant swapping torpedoes for bombs, a process that took about an hour. But what about American carriers? At 7:28 a.m., a Japanese scout plane reported sighting American ships. Nagumo demanded clarification. What type of ships? The scout took 20 minutes to answer. At 7:45, the response came. The enemy is accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. A carrier. Now Nagumo had to decide immediately. Keep the torpedo-armed aircraft on deck and launch against the American carrier, or rearm for a second Midway strike. He chose to rearm for Midway. The American carrier was far away, he reasoned, and he needed to suppress Midway's aircraft before they could attack his fleet. His own Midway strike force would be returning soon, low on fuel. He needed clear decks to recover them. At 7:45 a.m., Nagumo ordered rearm aircraft with bombs for land targets. Ordnance crews swarmed the carrier decks. They removed torpedoes from aircraft and replaced them with bombs. The torpedoes were set aside on the deck. This was faster than lowering them to the magazines below. 20 minutes later, at 8:09 a.m., a scout plane sent another message. The enemy fleet is accompanied by 5 cruisers and 5 destroyers. Still no confirmation of carrier type. Nagumo wavered. At 8:20 a.m., the scout confirmed. The enemy is accompanied by what appears to be a carrier in position to the rear of the others. Nagumo reversed his order. Prepare to attack enemy carriers. Now the ordnance crews had to swap back. Remove the bombs. Bring up the torpedoes from below, because the first set was still sitting on deck. The hangar decks became cluttered with weapons and fuel lines. Aircraft were moved, spotted, and respotted. The carriers were vulnerable. Aircraft crowded the decks. Fuel lines ran everywhere. Ordnance was stacked in the open, and American aircraft were inbound. The American strike from Enterprise and Hornet didn't arrive as a coordinated attack. Aircraft flew at different speeds, became separated, and approached the Japanese fleet in fragments. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet arrived first. 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, no fighter escort. They had gotten separated from their fighters and dive bombers. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron led them toward the Japanese carriers alone. The Devastator was obsolete. Top speed 115 miles per hour. No armor. To drop torpedoes, it had to fly straight and level at low altitude for several miles, making it an easy target. At 9:20 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 8 began its attack run on the Japanese carriers. Japanese fighters swarmed them. Zero fighters had a speed advantage of 80 miles per hour. They could attack from any angle. Anti-aircraft fire from every ship in the Japanese fleet filled the sky. One by one, the Devastators were shot down. Ensign George Gay watched his squadron mates crash into the ocean. His own aircraft was hit repeatedly. His gunner was killed. His controls were damaged. He pressed on and dropped his torpedo. It missed. Seconds later, his plane crashed. Gay survived. He floated in the ocean for 30 hours and watched the entire battle. He was the only survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8. 14 Devastators and 29 men died. Their torpedoes failed to hit any Japanese ships. The attack appeared to accomplish nothing. But Torpedo Squadron 8 changed the battle. The Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire concentrated on the low-flying torpedo bombers. Every Zero fighter dove to low altitude to engage them. Every ship's guns fired at the torpedo planes. And while the Japanese were distracted at sea level, the American dive bombers arrived at high altitude. 10:22 a.m., June 4, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey led 33 SBD, Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise. He had launched 2 hours earlier and flown to the expected Japanese position. They weren't there. McCluskey had to guess where they'd gone. He chose to search northwest. He was running low on fuel. Some pilots signaled they needed to return to Enterprise. McCluskey kept going. Then he saw a Japanese destroyer below, moving fast, leaving a white wake. The destroyer was rushing to catch up with the carrier fleet. McCluskey followed it. At 10:22 a.m., McCluskey's dive bombers found the Japanese carriers. Below him, he saw 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Their decks were crowded with aircraft being armed and fueled. Ordnance and fuel lines were everywhere. The carriers were vulnerable. And they were undefended. Every Japanese fighter was at sea level, finishing off the American torpedo bombers. No fighters at altitude. The carriers were naked. McCluskey's dive bombers rolled into their attack dives. At the same moment, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie arrived with 17 dive bombers from Yorktown. He had also gotten separated from his torpedo bombers, but found the Japanese fleet independently. He attacked from a different angle. The Japanese carriers had no warning. The first they knew of the dive bomber attack was when the bombs started falling. Akagi was hit first. One bomb struck the middle of the flight deck. It penetrated to the hangar deck, where aircraft were being refueled. Gasoline ignited. A second bomb hit aft, starting more fires. Within minutes, Akagi was an inferno. Bombs, torpedoes, and fuel on the hangar deck began exploding. Kaga took 4 bomb hits. All 4 started fires that spread rapidly through the ship. Ordnance began cooking off. The crew fought the fires for hours, but couldn't control them. Soryu was hit by 3 bombs in rapid succession. Like Akagi and Kaga, Soryu's hangar deck was filled with armed aircraft and fuel. The bombs turned her into a blazing wreck in minutes. 3 Japanese carriers destroyed in 5 minutes. The American dive bombers had caught the Japanese carriers at the worst possible moment. Admiral Nagumo's decision to rearm his aircraft twice left the carriers vulnerable. The decks were cluttered with ordnance. Fuel lines were open. Aircraft couldn't launch. And the sacrifice of the torpedo bombers had pulled every Japanese fighter down to sea level. Station Hypo's intelligence put the American carriers in perfect position. Admiral Nimitz's decision to trust that intelligence made the ambush possible. And the timing, accidental though it was, created a window of vulnerability that the dive bombers exploited. 1 Japanese carrier remained. Hiryu was separated from the other 3 carriers and escaped the first attack. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi commanded Hiryu. He launched an immediate counterstrike against the American carriers. At 10:54 a.m., 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters launched from Hiryu. They flew east, searching for the American carriers. At 12:10 p.m., they found Yorktown. Yorktown's radar detected the incoming aircraft 40 miles away. The carrier launched its remaining fighters and prepared for attack. At 12:20 p.m., the Japanese dove on Yorktown. American fighters shot down 10 of the 18 Japanese bombers. Anti-aircraft fire was heavy, but 3 bombs hit Yorktown. One penetrated 4 decks before exploding. Another hit the smokestack, extinguishing fires in 5 boilers. Yorktown's speed dropped from 30 knots to 6 knots. Damage control parties worked frantically. Within an hour, they had Yorktown's speed back up to 19 knots. The carrier could launch and recover aircraft again. She was hurt, but operational. Then Hiryu launched a second strike. 10 torpedo bombers and 6 fighters. At 2:40 p.m., they found Yorktown. This time, 2 torpedoes hit the carrier on her port side. The hits jammed her rudder and flooded 3 fire rooms. Yorktown began to list. At 3 p.m., her captain ordered abandon ship. But Hiryu's counterstrikes revealed her position. At 3:30 p.m., 24 dive bombers from Enterprise found Hiryu. They attacked at 5 p.m. 4 bombs hit the carrier. Like the other 3 Japanese carriers, Hiryu's hangar deck was filled with aircraft and ordnance. Fires spread immediately. By 6:23 p.m., Hiryu was dead in the water, burning uncontrollably. As the sun set on June 4th, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers were burning. Akagi Kaga and Soryu blazed out of control. Their crews abandoned ship during the night. Japanese destroyers scuttled them with torpedoes. Hiryu burned through the night. Admiral Yamaguchi chose to go down with his ship. At 5:10 a.m. on June 5th, Japanese destroyers torpedoed Hiryu. She sank minutes later. The Japanese had lost 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, and 3,057 men. The carrier force that struck Pearl Harbor was destroyed. America lost Yorktown, though she didn't sink immediately. A Japanese submarine found her under tow on June 6th and torpedoed both Yorktown and her escorting destroyer. Yorktown finally sank on June 7th. Total American losses: 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 145 aircraft, and 307 men. It was the most decisive naval victory in American history. In one day, the balance of power in the Pacific shifted from Japan to America. The victory at Midway was built on intelligence. Station Hypo's code-breaking identified the Japanese target, composition, and timing. Admiral Nimitz's decision to trust that intelligence positioned American carriers for ambush. Without that decision, the battle would have been fought very differently. Consider the alternative scenario. If Nimitz had hedged his bets and kept his carriers dispersed, the Japanese would have struck Midway with surprise. The atoll might have fallen. Japanese carriers could have raided Hawaii or supported operations in the Aleutians. America would have had to respond reactively, always one step behind Japanese initiatives. Instead, Nimitz concentrated his forces based on intelligence many considered speculative. He staked America's entire Pacific carrier force on Joseph Rochefort's analysis of fragmentary Japanese radio traffic. It was a calculated gamble. The intelligence was good enough to win, but not perfect. Station Hypo correctly identified the target, date, and approach vector. But they underestimated Japanese strength, reporting for carriers when Japan brought 4+ supporting ships and the main battle fleet. They didn't know about Admiral Yamamoto's position far to the rear with additional battleships. But the core intelligence was correct. Midway was the target, and the attack would come from the northwest in early June. That was enough. Nimitz positioned his carriers northeast of Midway, exactly where they needed to be to intercept the Japanese approach. Breaking JN-25 required enormous effort. The Japanese Navy changed codebooks regularly, forcing Station Hypo to rebuild their understanding constantly. Every intercepted message provided fragments of information. Repeated phrases helped identify code groups. Traffic analysis revealed fleet movements even when the content couldn't be read. The work was tedious and uncertain. Commander Rochefort's team worked 12 to 16-hour shifts. They analyzed thousands of messages for patterns. They built statistical models. They guessed at meanings and tested those guesses against subsequent messages. Gradually, they built a partial codebook. By May 1942, they could read about 15% of Japanese messages. That sounds minimal, but 15% of every message across an entire fleet provided substantial intelligence. A single readable phrase, like AF or carrier division, in context with ship identifications and dates, could reveal operational plans. The AF confirmation using Midway's false water shortage message demonstrated the sophistication of Station Hypo's methods. Rochefort suspected AF meant Midway, but needed proof. By causing Midway to broadcast a false problem, then, watching for Japanese reaction, he confirmed his hypothesis. This kind of creative intelligence tradecraft gave American commanders confidence in Station Hypo's conclusions. Other intelligence sources supported the code breaking. Radio direction, finding tracked Japanese fleet movements. Traffic analysis identified which units were communicating with each other. Even when messages couldn't be read, the pattern of communications revealed operational tempo. Before major operations, radio traffic increased. During radio silence, direction finding could still track fleet movements. Midway ended Japanese offensive capability in the Pacific. Before June 4th, Japan could strike anywhere in the Pacific with carrier-based air power. After June 4th, Japan was on the defensive. They had lost 4 fleet carriers and, more critically, many of their most experienced aircrew. Pilots who had trained for years and fought since Pearl Harbor were gone. Japan could build new carriers, but replacing veteran aircrew would take years they didn't have. The battle changed American strategy. Before Midway, America was fighting a defensive war, trying to slow Japanese expansion. After Midway, America could take the offensive. The Guadalcanal campaign began 2 months later. Island hopping across the Pacific became possible because Japanese carrier power could no longer threaten American operations. Midway also validated aircraft carrier warfare doctrine. Both sides had built their battle plans around carriers, not battleships. The entire battle was fought by aircraft. Surface ships never engaged each other. Admiral Yamamoto brought massive battleship strength to Midway, including the giant battleship Yamato, but they never fired a shot. Carriers decided the battle. The victory strengthened American morale. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, America had defeated the Japanese carrier fleet that had seemed invincible. The psychological impact was enormous. Americans believed they could win. Japanese confidence in inevitable victory was shaken. Behind the intelligence and strategy were individuals making decisions under pressure. Admiral Nimitz had to choose between conflicting intelligence assessments. Station Hypo said Midway. Washington said elsewhere. Nimitz chose to trust Rochefort, a decision that required confidence in his people, and willingness to stake everything on intelligence analysis. Commander Rochefort faced pressure from senior officers who doubted his conclusions. Naval Intelligence in Washington had more resources and prestige. But Rochefort believed his frontline position in Pearl Harbor gave him better access to Pacific radio traffic. He defended his analysis against skeptics and proved correct. Admiral Nagumo faced impossible choices on June 4th. Attack Midway or prepare for American carriers. He tried to do both and ended up vulnerable to both. His decisions were reasonable given the information he had. But the Americans knew more about Japanese plans than Nagumo knew about American positions. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey made a critical decision when he couldn't find the Japanese carriers at the expected position. He could have returned to Enterprise, conserving fuel and aircraft. Instead, he searched northwest on a hunch and found the Japanese fleet. That decision put his dive bombers in position to strike at the critical moment. Pilots like John Waldron of Torpedo Squadron 8 pressed hopeless attacks, knowing they likely wouldn't survive. Their sacrifice drew Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire to sea level, creating the window the dive bombers exploited. Waldron's last documented words were, "We will go in. We won't turn back." 14 of 15 aircraft were shot down. Those attacks appeared to fail, but they enabled the dive bombers' success. American dive bombers proved superior to Japanese counterparts at Midway. The SBD Dauntless could carry a 1,000-pound bomb, had a hydraulically operated dive brake for controlled dives, and was sturdy enough to survive heavy anti-aircraft fire. At Midway, Dauntless dive bombers sank all 4 Japanese carriers. Japanese torpedoes were superior to American torpedoes. Japanese Type 91 aerial torpedoes were fast, reliable, and deadly. They sank Yorktown. American torpedoes at Midway either missed or failed to explode. Torpedo Squadron 8's 14 torpedoes that reached their targets accomplished nothing, because American torpedo technology was defective. Radar gave American carriers early warning of Japanese attacks. Yorktown detected the first Japanese strike at 40 miles range, giving time to launch fighters and prepare defenses. Japanese carriers had no radar and received no warning of American dive bomber attacks until bombs were falling. American damage control proved superior. Yorktown survived 3 bomb hits and continued operating until torpedoed hours later. Even then, she stayed afloat for 2 days. Japanese carriers lacked effective damage control systems. Fires spread rapidly through their ships. All 4 Japanese carriers at Midway were destroyed by fires that started from relatively few bomb hits. Repairing Yorktown in 3 days required industrial effort that matched the battle itself. Navy engineers at Pearl Harbor assessed damage that should have taken 3 months to repair. Admiral Nimitz gave them 72 hours. 1,400 workers swarmed the carrier. They worked in shifts around the clock. Welders sealed ruptured hull plates. Electricians replaced damaged systems. Damage control teams tested every compartment for leaks. Ordnance crews restocked magazines. Supply officers loaded provisions for a crew of 2,500. The compressed repair schedule left Yorktown vulnerable. She wasn't fully repaired when she sailed for Midway. Some systems remained damaged. Watertight integrity was compromised. But she was operational, and Nimitz needed every carrier he could get. That decision paid off. Yorktown's aircraft participated in the decisive attacks on the Japanese carriers. Her fighters and anti-aircraft guns defended the task force. Even after taking bomb hits, she recovered aircraft and remained operational until torpedoed. The 3-day repair miracle gave America a 3rd carrier at Midway, and that carrier helped win the battle. Station Hypo's success at Midway established code-breaking as central to Pacific War strategy. After Midway, commanders trusted intelligence. Subsequent operations throughout the Pacific used code-breaking intelligence to position forces and anticipate Japanese movements. The most dramatic example came in April 1943. Station Hypo intercepted and decoded Japanese messages indicating that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto would visit Bougainville on April 18th. The messages specified his flight route and timing. American P-38 fighters intercepted Yamamoto's aircraft and shot it down, killing Japan's most experienced naval commander. That operation was possible only because of code-breaking intelligence and commanders who trusted it. Code-breaking also enabled the submarine campaign against Japanese shipping. Intelligence identified convoy routes and timing, allowing submarines to position for attacks. By 1944, American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant ships faster than Japan could replace them, strangling Japanese industry and logistics. The intelligence war continued throughout the Pacific campaign. Japan never discovered that America had broken JN-25. They changed codebooks periodically, forcing American codebreakers to rebuild their understanding, but they never suspected the fundamental compromise. This allowed America to read Japanese operational messages throughout the war. Admiral Nimitz's decision to trust Joseph Rochefort's intelligence was the decisive moment of the Pacific War. Everything else flowed from that choice. The positioning of American carriers northeast of Midway, the ambush of the Japanese fleet, the destruction of 4 carriers in 1 day, the shift from defensive to offensive operations, all depended on Nimitz's willingness to stake everything on fragmentary intelligence many considered unreliable. Consider the weight of that decision. Nimitz commanded the Pacific Fleet 6 months after Pearl Harbor. His battleships were sunk or damaged. His carrier force consisted of 3 ships. If he positioned those carriers incorrectly, America might lose its remaining naval power in the Pacific. The West Coast would be vulnerable. Hawaii could be threatened. The war might be lost. Nimitz chose to trust his intelligence team. He positioned his carriers exactly where Rochefort said the Japanese would appear. He gave his commanders complete intelligence about Japanese plans. He committed America's entire available carrier force to a single point in the Pacific Ocean. Based on code-breaking analysis that Washington doubted, it was the right decision. On June 4, 1942, the Japanese carrier fleet appeared exactly where Station Hypo said it would be, at exactly the time predicted, following exactly the approach vector Rochefort had identified. American carriers were waiting. The ambush succeeded. Japan lost 4 carriers. The Pacific War turned one decision. One man's faith in his intelligence team. one gamble that paid off. The code-breaking decision that destroyed Japan's carrier fleet and changed the war.